All right. Hey, everybody. I hope you guys are having a great week, great Thursday evening. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. So tonight on this webinar, I want to cover movement strategies to improve range of motion in joint health. Awesome topic, in my opinion. Hope you guys enjoy it as well. I think a lot of people are searching or seeking out different health, fitness, running related goals. And just need to understand that this needs to be the underlying foundational piece. So we don't just get stronger to get stronger, run faster to run faster, lose weight to lose weight. We do all these things while also improving the quality of our movement in the process. And we'll kind of dig into that more as we get going. Do me a favor before we get started, silence any technology around you. I have a few, again, details within this webinar I want to make sure you fully grasp. So if you can, cell phones, TVs, turn that off for a second just to make sure you get the most from this. Next, if you can take a second and locate the Q&A button. So depending on how you're accessing the webinar today, phone, iPad, computer, you should see somewhere on your screen where you can click a Q&A button. I want you to click that right now. At any point throughout the webinar, you can ask questions, provide feedback, share something with me, tell me to slow down. For those of you that have been on my webinars in the past, originally from Boston, changed my accent over the years, but still have a tendency to talk fast, especially when I get excited with this type of stuff. So yell at me at any point. But before we get going, and I know as you have that Q&A button out, what I want you to do right now is take a second, actually in that Q&A, I want you to write your name. I want you to write where you're attending from, where you located right now, right? Where do you live? And then what is the most important thing you want to get from the webinar this evening? Again, not just injury prevention or joint health, right? That's the fluff stuff everyone's been throwing at me in the registration. What is the main thing you want to get from this that can hopefully really positively impact your life moving forward? What is that big thing that you want to change or that big boulder you want to push over? So I'm going to take a second as you guys input something in there, name, location, and that really big thing that you want to hopefully use this webinar to create positive change in your life with. I'll give you guys a second as you input here. Got a couple coming in. Beth, shout out to Beth. Belinda. Left hip mojo from Jazz It Up June. Jessica. Richard talking about tight hamstrings. Awesome. I'm kind of curious to you guys. Why does this stuff matter to you? I mean, who cares? Are these things affecting you guys in any way, or are they something you're trying to fix just because you're trying to fix them? Claudette, awesome. Welcome, Claudette. Good to see you again from Nashville. Looking for it to protect the spine. I know we're talking about osteoporosis prevention, spine health, those kinds of things. Going to give another 15 seconds or so. Okay, left knee pain. Awesome, awesome. All right, guys, so let's get moving here. Betsy, Grand Rapids, welcome. Running 5Ks to 10Ks, want to make sure safe and healthy. Great. So from an injury reduction standpoint, just staying healthy. Andrea, welcome from Franklin, Tennessee. How do you know what's good range of motion for yourself? Awesome. We'll dig into that too in a second. All right, guys. So if anyone didn't write in there, make sure you do that now. I'm going to get to a lot of these as we cover the content today. And I'm definitely going to scroll back through at various points just to make sure I'm not missing anything. But after or at the end of this webinar, I will be raffling off one free evaluation and movement assessment. Doesn't matter if you're local here to the West Bloomfield, kind of southeast Michigan area, or you're virtual, remote. We can do this in any way, but I want to make sure that just based on this content today, I'm helping one person and hopefully more potentially, but helping one person really dig deep to understand what are those big things you need to improve? What are your goals? What are your needs? And how do we put you on a path to see better results moving forward? Like I mentioned, this is one of those big areas that I think people tend to miss. We look at our health, fitness, running goals as that's the thing we want to accomplish, but we need to really take a deeper look at the body in the process. How do we make the body move and function in a more efficient manner, just so we can continue to do these things for years and years to come? That's the huge thing I hope you accomplish from watching the webinar today. And by chance, if, again, you do not win the webinar, you do not win the raffle, I am going to also send out a link for a 30-minute customization call. So this is just something I do and offer to anyone after these webinars. What I have found over the years is a lot of people sit here on the other side of the computer camera, watch the webinars, and then I hear from them 6-12 months later and like, okay, you went to that webinar. What did you do? What did you change? And a lot of times it's nothing, right? A lot of people don't know how to take action from this. This stuff, again, will be very simple that we go through today, but it's really hard to apply those to your specific needs. So if you're not a winner of the raffle, through that customization call, we'll kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of the content here, your goals, your needs, and figure out a way, the best path for you moving forward. So just to know up front, I am not just a random guy who does free webinars. I do this for a living. So this is how I support myself and my family. This is not a sales pitch in disguise. I do not get on the customization calls and say, okay, these are your options. My goal is actually to help you in some way. If we decide to work together, that's great. If not, I still want you to walk away with value in knowing exactly what you can do moving forward. Now, at the end of the webinar, by chance, if you cannot stay for the entire webinar, I will be sending the webinar replay out. So make sure at some point, if you have to jump out for a few minutes, cooking dinner, taking care of kids, whatever you have to do, check the webinar replay, which will be sent out tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Look in your spam folder. It will be coming through to you. If you have, again, by chance, don't receive it, reach out to me directly and I'll make sure you get that. Now, like I mentioned, my name is Garrett McLaughlin, licensed healthcare professional, athletic trainer, strength conditioning coach, and an ART provider, which is called active release techniques. Very helpful when we're talking about range of motion and joint health to, again, do some type of soft tissue manual therapy, joint mobilizations, take care of the body in a way that sometimes can be a little bit harder to do on your own with basic movements. Obviously, I want to teach you tonight how to utilize those basic movements, how to address different areas of the body so you can hopefully be as self-sufficient as possible. I run what's called the Healthy Running and the Functionally Fit program. Again, it doesn't matter what your goals are, where you're starting from, where you're trying to get to. I just try to help people achieve their health, fitness, running goals while reducing the risk of injury and potentially, again, improving the ability to move freely. That's what it's all about here. I know one of my personal goals is, hopefully I look back, I'm not going to know for a long time here, 50 years from now, but when I'm 85, 90 years old, I want to look back and say, Garrett, you did things right? I don't care what races you did. I don't care how fast you ran. I don't care those other things. Are you still able to run, move, chase your grandkids, hike, do stuff with friends, go fly fishing? Like, that's the stuff that really matters to me. I really look at this from a longevity standpoint. And that's what I hope you kind of gain a little bit of knowledge and insight on that tonight. Now, what I want you to learn today, we're going to cover the science behind range of motion. So for those of you that have been on my webinars before that know me, I'm kind of a nerd about this stuff. I love this stuff, love reading the research and understanding the why behind things. I don't want to give you my opinion as much as I want to give you what we have actually backed up and validated through science. Obviously, a lot of that stuff is constantly changing, constantly evolving, but it tends to be an industry where a lot of things are just thrown out there, right? We're doing things because this person said to do it, or that person said to do it because that person told them to do it. I'm going to kind of stick with some of the research here today. So a lot of this stuff has been backed up, and it's me kind of sharing that with you, or being a middleman for you. We're going to dig into, does static stretching reduce your risk of injury? Common misconception I hear thrown around, especially in the endurance community. We're under the impression if I just stretch something, it's going to then hopefully not hurt later on. There's some research behind that, and a lot of research going into depth there. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then lastly, kind of cut off here a little bit with me on the screen, but how to preserve and or increase range of motion with some simple drills. These things are so simple. They're just tweaks on what you are already most likely doing if you are stretching, doing mobility drills. It's just a much better way to do it that addresses the body the way it's designed to be addressed, right? Not just stretching a tissue to stretch a tissue. We're applying some other strategies within that stretch to get the most bang for our buck. Now, if you are someone, and you're here because you have a history of joint pain and injury, this is a great place to be. A couple asterisks right there. Everyone comes here saying, you know what, I have knee pain, I have hamstring pain, I have this going on, I'm going to do this drill and that's going to address this. Please realize that injury and pain is a lot more in depth than we're going to go within this webinar today. It's just, we're going to cover some general strategies to help you improve range of motion and just overall health of your joints. Injury is crossing over that point. So we need to understand if that's you, if you're someone that's dealing with pain and you're here in this webinar trying to get out of pain, some of these things potentially could help and could help very well, but you need to be evaluated. You need to be assessed. You need to understand what's going on. Because a lot of times if it's a knee problem and you want to do some kind of drill for the knee, it might not actually be the knee. Right? We could make things worse in the process, not understanding what the root cause of that pain is. So make sure, get an evaluation done, contact me directly. Let's look into what's going on, and try not to apply general strategies there. Now, if you're someone that wants to move freely and feel your best for years to come, that's me right there. I fit into that category. Again, longevity is really the underlying thing beyond, underneath all of this, right? Rather than talking about specific races, upcoming races, or those things that you're trying to accomplish within the next 3 to 6 months, how do we just feel our best and thrive for years and years to come, right? That should be the underlying thing, the foundation of our approach here. Then lastly, if you want to, again, if you feel tight and restricted in a way that limits your daily activities, doesn't matter what those daily activities are. We're not going to focus, a lot of my webinars are running specific. We're going to focus on just range of motion, joint health, and more of a general sense that can be applied across all different activities and sports. So if you have trouble reaching up into that cabinet to grab a pitcher, tying your shoe, the back hurts, back feels tight, running, there's some kind of pain with running due to limited big toe motion, ankle, dorsey, whatever, what have you, right? If you are limited in some way, I'm going to show you some awesome strategies to help open up and expand your range of motion, so you can address that the right way. Now, to get us started here, science behind range of motion. So a couple questions for you. And I think one thing we really need to realize is tightness, right? A lot of people attend this webinar saying, I'm tight. I'm going to go to this webinar because something feels tight. Tightness is so subjective, right? It could mean anything and be caused by anything. A lot of times it's not even actually the tissue that's tight, right? Well, a lot of people complain of hamstring tightness. Are the hamstrings actually the problem, or is it something else that's creating the hamstrings being, or what's perceived to be the problem? So a couple of questions you need to ask yourself to really dig into this a little bit more. Do you feel stiff, right? So these first two over here on the left side of your screen, do you feel stiff, or are you restricted moving through the range of motion? One thing that I've seen throughout the years, and why I just love this topic, because it's so, it can be very confusing for a lot of people. Just because something feels stiff doesn't mean it's tight. For instance, when I was down in Nashville, I worked with a lot of yoga instructors. So with the active release techniques therapy that I do, a lot of people sought me out for tightness, for tension, for pain, and we would work on these areas and we'd evaluate and see what's going on. I had some yoga instructors that would come to me. I would say, okay, my hamstrings are tight. Lay on their back, their hamstring, we'd actually move them through the range of motion, their knees almost to their nose, and thinking, man, my hamstring is so tight. And I'm looking at that thinking, wow, there's so much range of motion there, right? This person's not tight. There's something else creating a sense of tension in that hamstring that we need to understand. So we need to understand the difference between, is something stiff? Is it a stiff muscle? Is that muscle holding tension or tone? Or is it actually limited and preventing you from moving through a full range of motion, okay? Then, do you have poor muscular endurance or stabilization creating fatigue? This is something where typically from a hamstring standpoint, I see from a lot of people, hamstring, calf. I had a guy in January came in saying, man, this right side is just so tight. I stretch and I foam roll and I stretch and I foam roll. It feels better temporarily, but it never goes away. So we looked at his range of motion. Everything checked out great. So, okay, why does this guy feel so tight all the time? Okay. As he was stabilizing on one leg, he had weakness in the hip. He was dropping his pelvis, right? He wasn't maintaining stability and strength throughout the hip. So a lot of these other muscles, the hamstring, TFL, IT band, some of these hip thigh muscles were actually taking on more tension to help address poor strength and stabilization from the hip. So we need to understand that it's not always tightness of a specific tissue that's the problem. It could be other things that predispose you to that. And then lastly, are poor mechanics increasing strain on specific tissues? Depending on how you get up and down from a chair, sit on a toilet seat, tie your shoes, right? Are you doing those in a way that's the most efficient way possible? Running mechanics, right? If you're running in a way that's actually causing you to overstress specific areas of the body, yes, tightness is a typical sensation you can feel from that. Doesn't mean necessarily stretching that sensation is going to fix the problem. You might have to address running form. You might have to address how you get up from the chair, how you pick your kid off the ground, how you reach to grab the pitcher from the top shelf of the cabinet, right? We need to understand all of these different things can play a role here when it comes to tightness, because tightness is so subjective that it can lead you down the stretching rabbit hole of, I'm going to stretch and stretch and stretch because it feels tight. It feels better after I stretch. Tomorrow it feels tight. I stretch it, it feels better. And we continue to do that whole, we're through this cycle of stretching things a lot of times that don't require stretching. So understanding, do I actually have limited range of motion, or is it something else? Okay, there's a possibility that it could be something else. Now, take into consideration different areas. So we look at the guy on the left side of the screen here, and this is a good example of some different things we'll go into today with the webinar. Difference between flexibility and mobility, right? Flexibility is him actually passively moving his leg throughout that range of motion. So this is a typical hamstring type stretch, right? He's using a stretching strap. He's stretching the hamstrings. Actually has great flexibility, right? Probably 120 degrees of flexion. We usually get to about 80 or so. But now if we look at just there's a difference. Even though he can still control his leg on the bottom, mobility, which is more his active control of this range of motion, you can see the discrepancy right there, right? A lot of times what we need to make sure of is we're doing a better job bridging the gap between how much passive range of motion we have to how much active range of motion we can control. There shouldn't be really any difference between him lifting his leg to where the stretching strap is. He should have control of that range of motion. Sometimes we feel the sensation of tightness when we have a discrepancy in that range. We have a lot of range of motion. However, our body has no idea how to access that range of motion. This is a very common thing I see with a lot of the runners that I work with, specifically in hip extension. So hip extension is laying on your stomach, extending that leg away from the body up towards the ceiling, right? That's extension. I put them on the table face down. I actually ask them, okay, lift your leg up as high as you can. Lift your leg up. Okay, we got an inch or so off the table. Okay, relax your leg. Let me lift you off the table. Like, man, I can lift that a whole lot more than that person can lift themselves, right? There's the discrepancy in their range of motion. So we need to make sure we don't just have a lot of range of motion, right? We need to make sure we're actively able to control and access that range of motion. And this is where good performance, this is where good function, this is where potentially going to reduce risk of injury can come into play when we're able to control our range of motion to the best of our ability. But take into consideration these other things throughout the process. Muscles is what we always focus on. I think that's what we need to get away from to some degree. A joint or the capsule, so how those bones are gliding and sliding together, the ligaments and the structure that are surrounding and engulfing that joint to create a nice stable environment there. Neurovascular structures, some of the nerves, the vascular system, neuromuscular control, which we can start to kind of look at the difference between flexibility and mobility here, right? How well are you able to control the brain, the nervous system to that joint and surrounding muscles? How are you able to control and activate those muscles to move through the range of motion? Strength, endurance, and mechanics are huge. You can't, again, outstretch something that's going to be a lack of strength, endurance, or poor mechanics in some way. And then breathing patterns, right? So this is a picture of, actually, I'm trying to think of when this was too. I keep going back to this and trying to remember the year it was. But when I was down in Nashville, I had an opportunity 2 or 3 years in a row to go down to Chattanooga. This is the USA Triathlon Southeast Junior team. So they have these training camps throughout the year for these kids, and these kids are just unbelievable. This was a picture. We're working on diaphragmatic breathing. What's called crocodile breathing. This was after one of their long training day. We actually had a strength training session, and now we're doing some cool down and mobility work. We're working through some diaphragmatic breathing drills because we need to realize that breathing is one of those other areas that tends to be neglected. If we're always in this stressed out, more sympathetic state, we increase the amount of tension, increase the amount of tone in the system. So through diaphragmatic breathing, some people, you can say meditation, prayer with breathing. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do this. We can help come out of that sympathetic state to release some tension, to release some tone, to then be in a better position to do a lot of our mobility and range of motion work in. If we're in this position and we're so tense up and tight, the body's not going to move, right? Why does the body want to move when it's holding all this tension? So we need to get out of that state first, relax, calm everything down, and then start addressing some of the range of motion and mobility there. Now, big question, Is static stretching a worthwhile injury prevention strategy? I kind of almost gave that away a little bit in the intro. There's no research to show that static stretching reduces the likelihood of injury. So if you're someone that, I'm not saying don't stretch, but don't stretch to reduce injury, right? You can't just stretch and think because a tissue is longer, it's not going to be painful or get hurt or be overloaded, right? It's a very simplistic viewpoint. There's so many other reasons that predispose us to injury. Our training program, strength, mechanics, endurance, right? Stretching alone won't reduce your risk of injury. A couple good studies here that definitely back that up. So we need to make sure we're doing a lot more than just stretching, right? It's not about just stretching from an injury prevention standpoint. You need to understand your weak links specifically, right? Do we have any differences in range of motion from side to side? Do we have any differences in strength from side to side? Or we have specific muscle weakness, poor endurance? How are our mechanics? I think we still address range of motion, but from a actual static stretching standpoint, we're not just going to stretch the hamstring, stretch the quads, and think that's going to reduce our chance of injury in any way. Now, some of the factors that matter, and I think Andrea had the question, how do you know what's good range of motion for yourself? It depends on your need, right? It depends on the desired task. It depends on your activities of daily living, the sports that you're participating in. I've worked with people that if you compare them to normal, right? We actually have normal joint ranges of motion. Oh, hip flexion, 80 degrees, this to that many degrees. Like we've quantified that. But in the end, who's average, right? In all of this, it really depends on what you need to complete, how much motion your body needs to move through, just based on what you're requiring of it. So we don't need to be more mobile. We don't need more range of motion just to have more range of motion, right? Is it going to improve anything? Not necessarily. We need enough range of motion to complete the desired task, to keep our joints healthy, to move in an efficient way where we're not limited. And hopefully we don't down the road, because we're asking much more of our joints later on, that it creates pain just because we're trying to do something that our joint isn't in a position to do. Now, we want enough active control, strength, endurance, and stability to perform the task with good quality. I had this conversation with a client the other night. Guy, we're working for 3 months now, and again, sits at a desk, corporate job, super tight through his neck, shoulders, really limited range of motion. And we're talking about getting strong or increasing muscle mass and all of that. It's like, it's great to be strong, but when is enough, right? When do we draw that line to say, again, strength no longer outweighs function? We need to make sure we have a good balance of range of motion, healthy movement, feeling good, right? All that good stuff to move and function on a daily basis, and strength to hopefully have just that tolerance, that resilience to the different tasks we're requiring of it. So we don't need more just to get more, right? We want enough to really function our best. And then on a daily basis, we need to consistently move. We need to move muscles, joints in a way that preserves and provides access to the range of motion. If you don't move in certain ways, you'll no longer be able to move in certain ways. I mean, it's so simple, right? Specificity principle. The body's going to adapt in a specific way based on the stress you place upon it. So if you're someone who sits at a desk all day and you're in this position, you don't think about posture, and then your buddy asked you, okay, you want to go and play tennis? And your first thing is, I'm going to get up and serve, but you're always in this position. You can imagine that shoulder's going to be a little bit tight as you go overhead, unless you're doing something to work on the range of motion of the shoulder to preserve that range of motion. What we see through the research is our bodies tend to decline as we age every decade of life, right? We're gonna slowly decline. We're gonna lose power. We're gonna lose bone mineral density. We're gonna lose elasticity of muscles and tendons. We're gonna become a little bit more stiff, lose mobility in joints, unless we're preserving these things. So I definitely highly recommend, and what I'll show you in a second is a series of drills to work on preserving the mobility or improving just your control of how you're moving through your range of motion, right? So let's make sure we don't lose these things. As we know, it becomes a lot harder to gain some of this back as we get older. So if we can hopefully offset that and reduce how much we're losing or slow down that decline over a lifetime, we could be in a much better position as we get older. So let me see where we're at here. So what I want to do here, is add a quick quiz on the screen. Those of you that have done the webinars in the past know that I love adding these small little quizzes in there. See how well you do, see how well you've been paying attention, see who's multitasking and eating dinner as they're watching here. So a couple simple questions. Number one, Garrett is a nerd, true or false? Simple giveaway there. 2, static stretching has been shown to reduce your risk of injury. Is that true or false? 3, every area that feels tight needs to be stretched. I messed up that question right there. So take a second and answer those. Notice I made a typo on the third one. It's every area that feels tight needs to be stretched. True or false? I'm gonna wait till we go 80% completed here. Good. We're above that now. I'm gonna give 3 seconds for one more person. Got a couple people sleeping already. Nice job. We're good. We're good. All right. So pretty good. Garrett's a nerd. It's true. Static stretching has been shown to reduce your risk of injury. That is false. Every area that feels tight needs to be stretched. That is false. Nice job, guys. All right. So as we move on here, again, feel free to ask questions. Slow me down if we're going too fast. Ask anything that relates to your situation. Now we're going to dig into the details here a little bit of what specific drills you can be incorporating on a regular basis. This first one is some of my favorites. Those of you on here, I'm going to check to see who's on here right now, are doing these in some way in your programs right now. You've got a handful of people that are probably doing these in their program. So hopefully we can further explain some of them as well for you. Now, please realize a lot of the stuff that I teach, a lot of the stuff that I follow, let's be honest, it's not for me, right? I'm not creating this stuff. I'm not the genius or the mastermind behind all of it. There are much smarter people out there that have studied these things, that have done research, that have put different systems and philosophies together that I go and grab from in various places. And I'm at this point where I don't follow one specific thought process. I grab from different buckets to combine based on that client, because everyone's so different. So a lot of the drills that you are going to see here are from functional range conditioning. What functional range conditioning is, it's a joint range of motion and strength training type system where we're working on building stronger, more resilient joints and range of motion. Okay. So Dr. Andrew Espina, one of my favorite quotes here, when I went to it was an online seminar actually. When I went to it, I thought it was perfect, right? You can't move where you can't move. Right. So that's a common thing. A lot of people expect things of their body that their body just can't get in the position to do. So we need to understand, how do we move in a way that matches our goals, that matches our needs, so we can keep our joints, muscles, body healthy and performing well for years to come. Right. So we need to make sure we're improving our ability to move, because we tend to lose that as we age. Now, we're going to run through a series of what's called CARs, right? CARs stand for Controlled Articular Rotations. Very simple. How do we control the joint in a rotational, multi-directional manner throughout its entire range of motion? So we're going to show you a series of joints here. We're going to slow down, look at a big three, I guess we can call them: the shoulder, spine, and then also the hip. And then I'll show you how to address other areas of the body, but we'll go through that a little bit more quickly. So when it comes to CARs, one of the biggest things to realize is, some of you, as you start these and do these for the first time, you might realize, man, my body just doesn't know that range of motion. I have that range of motion, but I'm not even familiar moving in that way, right? It's going to introduce you to different parts of your range of motion, different parts of your joint and how your muscles move, that sometimes can be a little bit uncomfortable or foreign feeling, just because we don't on a regular basis move ourselves that way. When it comes to shoulder CARs and the rest of these CARs, we want to what's called irradiate. We want to create tension throughout the system. If I can, you'll see in this one, I'm actually going to make a fist, hold my hand off the side as I engage, create tension through my arm, engage my core, glutes, legs, create tension everywhere, so I can stabilize the rest of the body as I isolate my shoulder throughout its full range of motion. What we see through the research is, if we're able to create tension and stabilize the body, we can then isolate that joint to a greater degree, rather than we're just relaxed here, moving around. I usually can only move so far, but if I stabilize the rest of the body and the system, I can move in a much efficient and effective manner. So now, shoulder CAR, see, engaging the core, hands out to the side, creating tension. I'm really gripping down. moving through this range of motion. So trying not to compensate. Compensations are a telltale sign of you're restricted in that joint, but this is a good way to really allow you to identify where you're tight, where you're restricted. You see head starting to tilt a little to the side, not a comfortable position for me, but coming across, externally rotated, coming across the body into flexion, rotating, internally rotating the shoulder, extending, coming back, reaching behind the body. Again, in an ideal world, if I had great range of motion of the shoulder, what I would be able to do from this position here, as I come up, I'd be able to reach my arm straight back and then end up by my side. Watch the deviation here. Watch where my arm goes. Off, 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 off. Look how far it is, right? So showing a lack of range of motion. External rotation, flexion, tight, internal rotation, starting to give me a little more freedom in the shoulder as I come back. But you can see, look at my body starting to tilt to the side a little bit as well, right? You see these little compensations that happen. My face, right? Really making me work surprisingly, right? All I'm doing is moving the shoulder through the range of motion. But as you create tension and you move through ranges that are challenging for you specifically, this becomes a very challenging drill. And then from here, we'll look one more time. Extension, rotation, externally rotating the shoulder, coming all the way up to flexion, and then coming across back down. So we're really exploring the entire range of motion of the shoulder. And you'll be able to see, again, am I twisting? Is my back arching? Is my head tilting? Am I able to get full rotation? I have some people right now, we look at them at the top of the position. So as they get up, let's see, as I come back, I'll pause right here because they have limited rotation. So you can see there, look at my hand. I'm trying to actually point my palm behind me. That's the amount of rotation I have in that position, right? So this quickly points out the deficiencies. You all see what I can be working on, what I try to address on a regular basis. But you can clearly see some of those limitations as you go through the cars, right? Just a very slow and controlled way. Are we necessarily improving range of motion as we do cars? No, probably not. We're going through what our body already has access to. So this is my range of motion right here. This is a good view of that, right? I'm not necessarily going to get more mobile or more range of motion from doing this, but I'm going to improve how my body is accessing and actively controlling that range of motion, which a lot of people fail to do. Now, next one, spine cars. Looking at the thoracic spine specifically, you're still going to sit on a bench. You can kneel on the ground. You can do the standing, but standing usually creates a lot more sway from the legs and other areas of the body. All I'm going to do here is go through this multi-directional range of motion, flexing, trying to make that come from the mid and upper back as much as possible, not the lower back. I'm not just leaning forward. I'm actually flexing my mid and upper vertebrae. And from here, I'm going to rotate as far as possible, laterally flex, extend. This is brutal. As you slowly come all the way around, you see my face right there. It's tight. Rotating around the other side, laterally flexing, and then we're just going to slowly come back down to the center. So that's half a rep. Always do these in both directions. Then from here, flexing, rotating, laterally flexing, coming back into extension. For some reason, I always make a face to that side too. Might be tighter rotating to the left side, but we like to see, do the legs change their position? Am I shifting in my seat? Am I not able to get to one side versus the other side? So that is the spine car right there. This is one of those things that majority of people need to work on. Spine health and health of the vertebrae and everything like that. Most people, because technology is in front of us, we're on computers, we're driving, we're flying, we're traveling, we're sitting on the couch maybe a little bit too long. Spine becomes very tight and restricted. So making sure you have good mobility and active control throughout the entire spinal column is something we want to work on here. So just to show you one more time, we'll just go one half rotation through. See, very slow, controlled, right? Mindful movement. If you're moving in a very mindful way, you'll be able to identify what are those ranges where you're getting stuck in. You're not able to fluidly move through. Ideally, we'd want this to be nice and smooth and fluid and unrestricted, but fortunately, just with life these days, that's just not how it is, right? Our joints, our muscles, everything else takes a beating. Now, next up, one of my favorites here, we're going into hip cars. So we're going to show the standing version. I know some of you on here that I work with, we do quadruped, we do other variations of this depending on the needs, but this is a standing version. Already getting ready to, again, create tension and irradiate. Hand is gripping down there. I'm driving the PVC pipe actually into the ground to engage and create some tension throughout these muscles. And then what I'm going to do is move through this multi-directional range of motion. So we have flexion, external rotation, going to horizontally move the hip into internal rotation, come back into extension, and then relax back down. Now extension, like I said earlier, a lot of people have trouble getting into. Internal rotation, external rotation, flexion. That one right there is so tough for me. You can see the face right there. Tough getting up as we come around. That's a tough angle for me. Transition, internal, external rotation right there. External rotation and flexion is a very restricted position, but keeping tension in the body, gripping the hand, driving the PVC down into the ground, moving through as best as possible and trying not to shift or sway. These are all level 1 cars, so we're not using any type of external. Again, I could set myself up actually in a doorway, hold on to the doorway so it prevents me from tilting side to side, provide almost a block to my body. This is just kind of out in space, me moving through my whole active range of motion. Okay, let's see. Beth, yes. It definitely could help this. So Beth asked, I need to learn this. It will help so glute medius, having some pain right now in the TFL. It could possibly help that. And we can definitely add those into the program for sure. Now, these are just 3 of the main joints. This is a lot of everything else, right? It's all the same. It's all the same. It's just moving through that joint's full range of motion. So you need to understand that joint a little bit, how that joint should move, the different ranges of motion. And you're just trying to explore that to the best of your degree. Best of your ability, sorry. So top left, ankle cars. We won't go through these too long. Trying to stabilize the hip. And also right here, I'm going to stabilize the knee. If you can see my hand is placed right on top, prevent that tibia from rotating. I'm just going to slowly scan through that full ankle range of motion. So I want to make sure I'm scanning and going the entire way. I'm really pushing flexion, eversion, dorsiflexion, inversion, right? Those of you with tight ankles, tight calves, troubles getting the hip into extension, moving the ankles through here can be very helpful to loosen up that joint capsule, which gets more range of motion in the ankle. Now, next up, and I'll try to keep these playing as you go. You can watch a few of them at once. Knee cars. So the knee, we always think about the knee as only flexing and extending. We have a degree of tibial internal, external rotation here. So if we look and actually put it like a laser pointer, if you feel on the front of your shin, you feel that bony prominence called the tibial tuberosity. If you put a laser pointer on that, you can see how that should be moving in and out as I go through this motion. It's turning in, or I'm turning outward. Now it's turning inward. We don't want to just flex and extend the knee. We want to work on that rotational capacity, right? There's something super important for runners too. This directly influences the foot, how that foot strikes the ground, and mechanics down the chain as well. So those people that over-supinate, over-pronate, if we have some type of tibial rotation going on, it's going to change how your foot strikes the ground and the position that you're in one way or the other. Wrist cars. Shout out to those people that work desk jobs, right? Tight through the wrist. Sorry, I didn't mean to play this one just yet. So slowly moving through flexion, extension, ulnar, radial deviation. Surprisingly tough range of motion to get through. Really helps tension in the forearms. If you're someone, shout out to Beth again, massage therapists, right? Working on people all day. You work at a computer, working on range of motion of the wrist, working on extensibility of those forearm muscles can be really helpful. Those that work in a trade, carpenters, construction workers, what have you. Elbow, right? Elbow flexion, extension, supination, pronation, right? These different motions here. I'm putting my hand across my body just above the elbow joint because I don't want to make sure I'm not rotating at the shoulder as I do this. I want to keep my arm pinned and I want to work on pronation, supination without that shoulder moving. Neck cars, probably something everyone should work on right here. Everything we said with the spine, the neck is forward in front of us, right? As we text, as we use the computer, what have you. So need to be able to move through that entire range of motion. Lateral flexion, rotation, flexion, extension, right? Should be able to look up all the way overhead, towards the ceiling, just slowly scanning through here. These are things we don't push through pain, right? If something hurts, we stop, or we change the degree we're moving through that range of motion. These aren't designed to fix pain. They're designed to move our muscles, to move our joints throughout their entire range of motion. So if you come to a position like if I was doing the neck one and I come down, and as I come down to here, I feel, oh man, this is pinching right here. I stop at that point. I get out of that position and then I move around it and I go to someone and I get that fixed, right? We don't push through pain with cars. We're trying to access our normal, healthy range of motion. If anything is painful, that means you need to go get checked out, right? So don't push through things that don't feel right. Now, increasing range of motion. We've heard already tight hamstrings in here, which we're definitely going to cover. Left patellar pain, not specifically. Protect the spine. So Claudette, the spine cars there will be really helpful for that, just to maintain mobility throughout that full range of motion. Now let me see so you guys can see. I'll put these here live so you guys can see some of the peeps we have. All right, so increasing range of motion with what's called Pails and Rails. So this is a specific technique that almost uses somewhat traditional static stretches. It doesn't have to be a certain stretch. You don't have to stretch the hamstrings this way. You can stretch the hamstrings any way and apply this sequence and apply this concept to it, and it will work for you, right? It's how we're incorporating the brain, the nervous system, the muscles, the joints, all of these systems together in a very cohesive way, rather than thinking I'm going to kick my leg up, stretch my hamstring, and then assume my hamstring is going to be more flexible after that, right? The hamstring is one part of a bigger system, right? We have neurology, we have muscle, we have so many different things working at one time. We can't assume that just addressing one single tissue, the hamstring, will make us more flexible. Now, we're going to show a couple different drills. So on the bottom left here, as we go through this is the 90-90 position. One of the best positions, if you're just sitting watching TV, get in this position because it works on left hip external rotation, right hip internal rotation. So we work on the rotational capacity of the hips, which a lot of people tend to lose. Now, what we're going to do here in the 90-90 position, make sure we have good angles. We want good angles here. I'm going to hold that stretch. I'm going to find a position where if I want to hinge forward, right? If we think pigeon to some degree, if I'm tall and I'm hinging forward to get a stretch through the front or the back side of that left hip, but I'm stretching towards the front leg, I'm going to hold that position for 2 minutes, okay? A lot of the research on stretching, mobility, range of motion, they studied everything from 15 seconds, 30, 60, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. It seems like 2 minutes is that golden number to be able to hold something, to actually see an improvement in range of motion. So a lot of people aren't holding things long enough. Now, what I'm going to do here is hold that position for 2 minutes. I'm going to add an active component to this. So what I'm going to do here, you can see pointing down, I'm going to create tension throughout the body, engage the abs, engage that left hip to drive the knee, to drive the shin down into the ground. I'm going to ramp up my intensity over 15 seconds. So I want to start at 0%, 0%, 10%, 30, 50, 70, 80, 90, 100, as hard as I can push, as long as there's no pain, depending on the goal of the movement. And I'm going to actively drive down. So think of what's happening here. I'm trying to improve external rotation, piriformis, hip rotators, posterior glute med. All of those are in a lengthened position. I'm now asking those muscles to contract in a lengthened position because I'm trying to connect that with the brain, with the nervous system, with the joint capsule, right? I want more sensory input to come in to tell my body, it's okay to get into this position. I'm safe here, right? A lot of times we don't allow ourselves in greater degrees of range of motion just because the body perceives that as threat. So if we are contracting our muscles in those positions in a safe and healthy way, we can really improve range of motion. Now from here, 15 seconds goes by. Then what I'm going to do after I ramp up my intensity, you can see making faces here because I'm pushing down pretty hard to see because it's isometric. I'm going to engage the opposite muscle. So I'm going to engage the hip flexor on that left side, the adductor, groin muscles, and the abs. And I'm going to actually pull myself into a deeper degree of motion. So I'm pulling myself actively into that. So at some point during this, right, both sides of the joint have fired and activated in some way. And then I'm going to breathe and relax. So the difference in range of motion, right? In the beginning, that's where I was. Sorry, this thing's in the way and I can't fast forward. At the end, you can see that increase in range of motion. That's what happens when you allow the muscles to activate and to drive and create some activation throughout this stretch position. We can then force more range of motion because things tend to relax. Okay, let me see. I have one question. So Andrew had a good question. I didn't really fully explain this. To go in the weeds here, but what's the difference between Pails and Rails? So Pails, I don't want to go too far into it. Pails is progressive angular isometric loading. Rails is regressive angular isometric loading. The difference between the contractions on this one. So my Pails contraction was when I was actually pushing from the muscles I was stretching. My Rails contraction was when I was pulling from the opposite side. So it's just telling you that we're going to fire the tissue that's stretching, and then we're going to fire the opposite tissue to sink more in the stretch. That's all Pails and Rails means in a kind of a simplified way. Now for the hamstring people out there, the hamstring people in the world, hold end range of motion. Simple stretch, right? Just kicking the leg up on something, chair, bench, what have you. And I'm going to find my end range. So I'm going to drive the PVCs down. I'm going to find a stretch position that's moderately uncomfortable. I'm going to drive then, again, hold that for 2 minutes. I'm going to drive my heel down. I'm going to increase in intensity. You can see starting to make some faces, increase some intensity, 0, 10, 20, 30, 50, 80, 100, as hard as I can drive that leg down into the bench, creating tension in that hamstring, which is lengthened, but it's contracting. And then I'm going to engage in a second, I think, engage my hip flexor and core. And I'm actually going to Rails contraction, pull myself closer or deeper into that range of motion, which should be right here. See me pulling. I'm pulling from the hip flexor in the abs. I'm using that opposite muscle group. I'm pushing through some pretty uncomfortable stretch right now. And I'm just going to breathe and relax. As soon as it lets me into that position, I try to breathe, relax, and just enjoy or sink into that deeper stretch. Now this one here, a lot of people, and I definitely recommend, this is a go-to for a lot of people. It should be, at least, hip extension. So this looks like your traditional half kneeling hip flexor stretch. We're going to get into a stretch position. I'm still driving the PVC pipes down. I'm not doing anything fancy right now. Gauging the core, engaging the glute, driving the hips forward. I'm going to contract this leg, left side hip flexor and quad, and try to pull that leg forward. That's engaging the quad and hip flexor as I'm in a stretch position, or it's lengthened. Hold that, build up an intensity for 15 seconds. And then I'm going to engage the glute and the hamstring on that left side and try to almost push myself forward. Contract the glute, increase the stretch for 15 seconds. You're going to see me shifting forward as best I can. It's a tight position for me. You don't see a lot of movement like some of the other ones. And then I'm going to just breathe and relax. I'm going to rest in this new position so I'm deeper in the range of motion. Everything should get you deeper within that range of motion. You should see the improvement on every single one. So that's a sequence right here. 2 minute, find your end range, stretch, hold, breathe. Try to relax as much as you can. Should be pretty uncomfortable. 15 seconds, contract that muscle, drive into the floor in some way, activate the muscle that you're actually stretching. 15 seconds, activate the opposite muscle. As you do, drive deeper into the range of motion. 30 seconds, relax. Regardless of the stretch you're doing right now, you can do this with the standing quad stretch. You can do this with a calf stretch on the wall. You can do this with anything, and it should work, right? It should be able to be applied to every single stretch. That's why I'm not showing you every single one. Now, let me see. So Stormtrooper here says hip extension. Pails and Rails is the golden ticket, which I agree. That one is super important, especially for the runners out there. Now, what most people are missing, people are stopping there. People are doing static stretching, stretching something, foam rolling something, and then they're going on with their day. You need to then teach the body, teach the brain, teach the nervous system how to control and really access that range of motion. We don't want flexibility just to have flexibility. We want mobility where we have good flexibility, but we can actually move our bodies all the way into that range of motion. So just to show you some simple things we would follow those up with, this is to follow up the hip external rotation one, which you could do a pigeon style one of what I showed earlier as well. But you can see here, I'm in a seated position. This is awful for me. We saw in the hip cars earlier, I couldn't flex and rotate the hip well. This is my one of my biggest weaknesses at the hips. So I'm in this position. I'm supporting my right leg right now in a figure 4 type position. All I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that, and I have to hold that leg in position 3 to 5 seconds, 3 to 10 seconds. It depends on the goals. Without that leg moving, I'm teaching my body now in a flex and externally rotated position how to control and actually access that range of motion. This is called the passive range hold. Now below, for the hamstring peeps, right? Same exact position, nothing changes here. But can I teach my leg? We saw the guy earlier, he could pull his leg so far back with the strap. He still did a good job without it, but he didn't go all the way to that end range. So he needed to teach him how to access that full range of motion. So here, how do I access that full range of motion? Actually, I messed this video up here. Realized I think I'm going to walk off in a second. I realized myself it was a little too easy. I run off to grab a yoga block, put the heel up, get myself a little bit higher towards that end range. And now I'm going to lift off just an inch, right? I want to get that block or get something underneath me to push me very close to my end range of motion. And then all I have to do is just lift and elevate off to teach myself how to control that. Now for the hip flexion, we did the hip extension one, that lunge position stretch, trying to improve hip extension. Now we're teaching the body how to move into extension. So I'm face down. I'm lifting that hip off the ground. I'm getting myself into extension past that neutral point. I can do this a couple of different ways. You can see right there as I fast forward, there's a yoga block under there. I'm lifting off the block, or I can actually go here into a, more quadruped position. And then I'm lifting off from the quadruped position. Now, because we're going to run out of time, I'm going to flip through some of this stuff. I had a couple for the shoulder, but we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to let them play a little bit here. We'll get to the Q&A here as we wrap up the raffle. So a couple different positions here you can see for the shoulder. We have shoulder internal rotation down here, shoulder external rotation up here, and shoulder flexion here. These two using the PVC pipe in 2 different positions, improving how well that arm can get up overhead. Couple different positions. We're doing the same thing as the hip Pails and Rails. It's a 2-minute stretch. It's a 15-second contraction. On these two, I'm actually driving that PVC pipe down into the ground to contract those tissues. And then at the end, I'm actually going to walk my hand up higher to increase my range of motion. So you can see walking the hand up higher, I'm expanding my range, getting more external, getting more flexion, right? Same exact concept. Now, as we go here, we have our passive range hold, we have our passive range liftoffs. These are just teaching us how to access that greater range of motion. Okay, on the top one, top left, I'm in internal rotation. I'm holding, I'm not to let that arm come out because it's tight, and I'm pulling it down, holding that position, not losing my internal rotation. Here you can see I'm actually lifting the PVC pipe off the ground, right? I'm getting that lift off from the end of my range of motion to teach my shoulder how to function, how to access the end of its range of motion. Now, as we start to wrap up here, let's throw one more poll up on the screen. One more little quiz. So quickly, and we'll wrap up here in the next 5 minutes or so, max. CAR stands for Control Articulate Range of Motion, Controlled Articular Rotations, Capsular Articular Revolutions. That's a tongue twister. The Pails and Rails sequence begins with a how many minute stretch? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 30 seconds? After you open up more motion, you must train the body how to use that newly acquired range for it to be permanent. Is that true or false? I'm going to give you guys 33 seconds right now. See how many people can get it in then. $15 seconds left. You guys are doing well. We got 70% of people, 80% of people. 8 seconds. 90% of people. Let's see where that one person is. Falling asleep. And all right, guys. So let's see. CAR stands for, it's the second one, Controlled Articular Rotations. The Pails and Rails sequence begins with a 2-minute stretch. Think about that. Even if you're doing some static stretching these days, hold that longer, right? We need minimum 2 minutes. After you open up new range of motion, you must train the body how to use that newly acquired range. That is true. All right. So as we wrap up here, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop those now in the Q&A so I can get to those in a minute or so. Take home message here for you guys. Tightness is subjective. So it does not always mean stretching is the solution, right? Do we need to look at strength, endurance, mechanics, stability, neuromuscular control? Are you able to access your full flexibility or range of motion, or is there a bunch of motion that you just cannot get to, right? Looking at, like I said, range of motion, neuromuscular control, strength, and stability, all of this stuff goes hand in hand. So if you're someone that says, hey, I'm tight, I would probably think there's most likely something going on beyond just that muscle is tight, right? Or that joint is tight. There's something else off somewhere that I would definitely look into and consider. And it's usually away from the site of what you're feeling, right? Hamstring tightness or hip tightness. Could it be ankle or big toe, right? There's a lot of different things that could create this, right? Shoulder tightness is actually the spine or the scapula. There's different things we need to look at to understand. The cars I showed you, do those things every day, right? Don't miss a day, every single day. If you want to preserve range of motion to the best of your ability, you want to teach yourself how to move through and access your full range of motion, do the cars. One thing that's also helpful there is that they're not in a predictable path. A lot of times people stretch the hamstrings, they stretch the shoulder, they stretch in the same position every single time. That's one line of tissue, right? We need to stretch in different positions, explore that joint to its greatest degree to really open up range of motion. So make sure you explore your joints and try not to get stuck in, this is the way I have to stretch because that's the way I was told. Try to move the body in different ways and see what positions you can get into and really open up some access there. Obviously, if you need more range of motion, supplement with other drills based on your needs. And like I tell everyone, stop guessing, start assessing. You need to understand what truly needs to be addressed. If you're continually stretching something and it's not getting better and you're doing a pretty good job on a regular basis, maybe it doesn't need to be stretched. Maybe there's some other problem. So get an evaluation, get an assessment. Happy to help you do that. But you need to look a little bit deeper to make sure you're doing what's actually needed, not just what you think is needed based on the subjective symptom of it feels tight. All right, guys. So entering the raffle, I'm going to raffle off an evaluation movement assessment. Doesn't matter where you live. If you're one of my people, I will, if you win this, I will give you the amount total of the raffle off your next month payment, whatever that is. Okay, so I want everyone to enter into this one. So hopefully help one lucky person. Movement assessment, evaluation. Let's understand what your goals are, what your needs, how do we move you from point A to point B in the most effective, safest, and efficient way possible. Yes or no, are you interested in entering the raffle? I told you if you do not win, I'm going to put up and share a link in a second for a customization call. I would definitely recommend schedule that if you're someone that's dealing with anything we talked about today. Let's figure out how are we going to individualize things to your need. Again, if I can help you directly and you program fits, I'm happy to talk with you about that, but I'm just here to help you as much as possible. Okay, good, done with that. All right, guys, so customization call. Like I always tell people, if nothing changes, nothing changes, right? So making sure if something's wrong here, you're changing something to address that. Sharing a link right now. Take a second now, schedule the customization call. Again, 30-minute call, all about you. Just to make sure you're figuring out how to apply these things to your situation so we can narrow down a couple that will be the most impactful rather than doing everything just to do everything. What's your injury history? What are your goals? What are your needs moving forward? And what specific things can we really outline for you to see the best results possible? So make sure you jump on that right now. I think it's set for only a limited amount of people. So make sure you do that sooner rather than later, just so you don't miss out there. Now, I just want to say thank you guys. Thanks for attending the webinar today. I will be sending tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time, the webinar replay, entire replay of this. You want to go through and watch some of this stuff again, and also the raffle winner. So if you entered the raffle, you have to check tomorrow. If you do not respond, I'm moving on to the next person as I usually do. So make sure you check the email, make sure it doesn't go to your spam folder. Schedule your customization call. Again, regardless if you entered the raffle or not, schedule a call. Let's figure things out. Why wait? Why put things off? there's been too many people that I've seen months or years later that have gone to webinars, that have gone to seminars, that I've talked to actually that are connecting with me now from Nashville 4, 5, 6 years ago. Say, oh, I didn't reach out then because of this. I'm still trying to do this. I'm like, oh man, let's just do this, right? Let's fix that problem once and for all. Let's get you on track. I'll do my best, the best of my ability to help you just see results. And whether it's just a conversation or it's enrollment in the program, I personally could care less. But check your spam folder tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And I just want to say thank you guys. If you guys have any questions, I'm just kidding. You don't have to Google it. Drop any questions right now into the Q&A. I'm happy to stay on for another 3 minutes. This has been a long day today. So any final questions here before we sign off, drop that in the Q&A. I think I got to everything so far. Let's see if anyone asked anything earlier. Pails and Rails we talked about. Glute medius TFL. How do you know if your range of motion is good for yourself? Depends on if you're satisfied with that range of motion, right? If that range of motion is giving you what you need and you're not seeing any problems with it, most likely it's good enough. We don't need more just to get more. Thank you, Sharon. So Betsy talking about increasing distances, 5Ks, 10Ks, want to say safe and healthy. I mean, some of this stuff would be great just as part of a dynamic warm-up, addressing any areas that you feel limited in. Because realize we're not, when we talk about the pails and rails and those things and the lift-offs and passive range holds, we're not just stretching, we're strengthening tissues at different ranges of motion. So doing this correctly, you can get pretty dang strong doing some of this stuff as well. We don't want to just be flexible and weak, right? We want to be strong and mobile, and that's what this kind of this system creates. Steph talking about the left patellar pain. A lot of things we could talk about with that, right? Running form in particular, overstriding, right? Is there a degree of overstriding, which is loading that left anterior knee? Do we have any kind of patellofemoral IT band issues, looking at the hip, looking at ankle mobility? So many things to look at. Now, Claudette hopefully helped provide some insight on the spine quickly, I guess, with the spine cars, but just making sure maintaining mobility, core stability, breathing, addressing areas above and below, loading, axial loading for just overall spine health and bone density. Richard, physical therapist, tight hamstrings, and deciding if that's tight hamstrings and if that matters, right? Especially, I know you're a runner, and we know running doesn't require, sorry, getting the dog for a second. Running doesn't require a whole lot of range of motion, specifically with the hamstrings. So a lot of times you need to look at eccentric strength of the hamstrings. Are you actually able to control that hamstring before you strike the ground? That hamstring lengthens as it contracts, and then our foot strikes the ground. So looking at eccentric control, looking at glute strength, ankle mobility, the hamstrings could be a million different things. Belinda, thank you. Beth, thank you. All right, guys, that is it. I hope you guys have a great night. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to hopefully connecting with some of you guys soon. Replay tomorrow, webinar, raffle winner tomorrow, and have a great rest of your evening and your week. Thanks, everybody.